Good evening and welcome to this week's Australian Sailing Club Conference. My name is Jo Keane, and in addition to working in sailing, I spend my time working on the Australian Sailing Board, and it's an absolute privilege to be here tonight with you. So this is the final series of our club conference webinars this year, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of the busyness of your life to join us, particularly in the way that you've adapted to the webinars and how we've been running them this year. So massive shout out to all of you for your efforts. So what these webinars have done is given presenters an opportunity to provide a live presentation followed by a question and answer session. So if you have any questions throughout tonight's presentation, please, we do ask you to ask away, and don't forget to include your name and the club that you are a member of. Recordings of tonight's webinar and all the other webinars that we've had today are on our club conference page. So it would be fantastic if you could have a look over there and see that. So tomorrow, we, as always here at Australian Sailing, we'd love to get your feedback. So we will be sending out an email including all the webinar conference webinars, but also your feedback on how much you've enjoyed the webinars and what has gone well and what we can do differently. So it would be really fantastic if you could take the time to fill out that survey for us. Now, we have some amazing sailors and volunteers here in Australia. So over the coming weeks, have a look out for the finalists for the state awards, because they'll be announced on Facebook. And I really encourage you to be inspired by the fabulous people we have in our sport, by seeing the great work that people are doing on and off the water. Just for an FYI, the Australian Sailing AGM has been scheduled shortly. And so I urge you, sorry, I've lost the page, so that's an error. So it's being scheduled for the 5th of November, and it will be delivered online this year, obviously because of COVID-19. So as a consequence, your state will be represented by your advisory committee chair or by your MYA president. We'd also like to do a massive shout out to all of you who have completed the 2020 club survey. We had a staggering 200 responses from clubs around the country, and this has provided just valuable insight into the key issues that we need to address here at Australian Sailing for our sport. So again, just want to highlight the fact that that's actually the best response we've ever had. So thank you again. After all, you know, we're here to serve our clubs, and we really want to make sure that we're taking on board your fabulous feedback. So what we are doing now in terms of next steps is we have going to be reviewing your feedback, and then we look forward to sharing the results and the steps that we can actually take to take on board your feedback to make sailing even better across Australia. Of course, it goes without saying that if you ever have any feedback about what we're doing well and what we can do differently, we really value your ideas and suggestions. So please get in contact with your regional manager, who would absolutely love to hear from you. So the next thing that so our strategic plan expires at the end of this year. And so normally our fabulous team at Australian Sailing, our staff would be working hard to actually start to plan for our next strategic plan. But as you can imagine, they've been incredibly busy just making sure that they're focusing on looking after our clubs through this unprecedented time. However, shortly we will be starting to work with clubs across the country and using the great insights that we've got from our club survey to really start, I guess, developing our short, medium and long-term strategies. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our fabulous CEO, Ben Houston. So Ben has been our CEO here at Australian Sailing for 18 months, and he's doing an absolutely fabulous job. For those of you who don't know, he joined us from Triathlon Australia and has a background in law and sponsorship. And so he's also currently the president of the Commonwealth Games of Australia. So Ben, I wanted to extend a warm welcome to you, and I'll hand over to you to go through your presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Jo, for the introduction. And in addition to Jo's role on the Australian Sailing Board, she's also chairs the kite falling working group, and I'll talk about that a little later. As Jo said, my name's Ben Houston. I'm the CEO of Australian Sailing. I've been in that role for the last 18 months. One of the highlights in joining the organisation has really been these club conferences and the opportunity that I've had to meet with many of you and to listen to what you've had to say about the way that your club works and what more you want from Australian Sailing. Even though that we're forced to conduct these conferences by video, I really want to ensure that we've got the engagement with the clubs and the classes, and I do want to hear, as Jo said, we do want to hear from you all, and that certainly remains a focus both for me and for the Australian Sailing Board. So moving to the agenda, there are a number of issues that I'd like to discuss tonight. So first I'll give you just a brief update on Australian Sailing. And then spend a little bit of time talking about the COVID-19 response, what we've done at Australian Sailing and what we've done to ensure that we support the clubs. I'll then talk about the Australian Sailing events, both pre-COVID and post-COVID, and then talk about affiliation fees and the process that we've gone through in terms of ensuring that we're crafting the right sort of affiliation fees, again, to ensure that clubs are maintaining their cash flows in these uncertain times. I'll also talk about membership and participation, about performance pathways, and also then talk about Australian Sailing Team and their preparation for the Olympics, before concluding with just a brief update and next steps in terms of the awards and the conferences. So in terms of our vision, purpose and goals, they're set out and they're known. As Jo had mentioned, our strategic plan concludes at the end of this calendar year, but the priorities around working with our clubs, I hope, remain, and one of our key priorities around growing participation, and that's the growth of membership, the growth of participation, and retaining our members within the club structure. And again, I'll talk about that in the context of some of the work that we're doing in developing our sailing pathway. We also want to build the profile of sailing. We do a very good job in talking to our members, but we want to broaden the audience for sailing and break down the perceived barriers about creating lifelong sailors for our sport. We also want to enhance the people, structure and culture of sailing, and that's really building the capability and capacity that we have in sailing in the board, in the Australian Sailing Team, but also in our clubs. And again, ensuring that sailing has the financial sustainability to both transition out of COVID, but also thrive in what will be a new normal for Australian sport. And lastly, we do want to maintain and drive high performance outcomes. And again, I'll talk about the changes in the high performance leadership program going forward. In terms of the strategy, again, as Jo said, the framework was designed by the clubs. We then engaged with key stakeholders around states, and it was adopted by the board. So again, as Jo said, we will be coming to you. We will be working with our clubs, classes and stakeholders to ensure that we both retain the fundamental pillars around growing sailing in Australia, but also looking at the other strategic priorities for the organisation. And again, it's at the heart of that, how we can support clubs. So next slide. So again, this is a short slide on our sport and our challenges. And it'd be fair to say that again, as a member-centric organisation, we want to represent the interests of our sport, and there's certainly been an opportunity to do that through the COVID crisis. But we also want to ensure that we're providing the best possible services, support and programs to you and to the Discover Sailing Centres. But likewise, we are very mindful that the challenges in achieving our goals is dictated by the COVID crisis. So I think it's appropriate now to discuss our response to the crisis. So next slide, please. So in terms of our response, it would be fair to say the impact of COVID has been significant both on Australian sailing and our sport, and particularly our clubs. But as I've said, our focus remains on supporting clubs. And to be frank, it's essential that our club network gets back and operating and trades out of the crisis. Why? Because clubs are our lifeblood, both in terms of our financial positioning, the retention of our club members, the support that we give them, but also because it's the incubator for our next crop of Olympians. So we've remained focused on supporting our clubs through this process. And I'll touch on this a little later, but we've delayed invoicing of the affiliation fees this year to help support clubs and their cash flow. We've advocated for clubs' rights and what the clubs need in terms of preserving their cash reserves with state and federal government agencies around rent relief and other grants for our sports. And we've also maintained an advocacy around JobKeeper, both initially and then the extension. And we've been having discussions with the Federal Sports Minister and other ministers to support our aims. As I reported earlier this year, unfortunately, I was obliged to make some staff at Australian Sailing redundant. And that was to preserve our cash reserves because we were very mindful that this is going to take some time for us to trade out. I was also mindful, and we were all mindful in discussions with the board, that we wanted to get the balance right within ensuring our financial sustainability, but also ensuring that we have the resources within the organisation to continue to support the clubs. And again, you will have already seen that we've adapted instructor, coach and official courses to the current situation we're facing, and many of those are online. Likewise, we're trialling new things. So the Zyke Australian e-Sailing National Challenge is one of those, very successful, and many clubs and club members got involved in that process. We're also helping clubs to engage with their members. And to be frank, I want to support and thank all of the clubs for the way that they've been supporting their club members and your sailing communities through this period. It's really demonstrated the resilience that we have in sailing. And I note that our president, Daniel Belcher, wrote about some of the case studies and stories around sailing, and wrote to the federal sports minister outlining those, because they are really part of the essence of sailing. And again, we should be very proud of the culture that we have in our sport. Next slide, please. So communication has been the key during COVID. And again, you can see from those quite large numbers that really is, so over 20,000 COVID information hub visits. The COVID-19 hub for Australian sailing has really been the conduit that we've had with sports in order to provide the best possible information we can from the best possible sources to inform both the hard decisions that we've had to make within Australian sailing, but also the very difficult decisions that you've all had to make within your clubs. And we wanted to ensure that we played a role both in navigating the various different jurisdictional state border openings and closures, and to ensure that we had the best possible information for you. That's been a very time-consuming matter for the team, but incredibly beneficial. You'll see that we've sent out almost 300,000 individual COVID-specific emails and posted about 60 COVID information articles to inform our community about the best possible information to inform their decisions. And again, the 65%, it goes without saying, really, that they're the bulk of the inquiries that's coming through to Australian sailing at the moment. Next slide, please. So sailing events, and again, I think we need to be mindful when we look at the sailing events and that title that we're really in sort of two seasons. And I think it's worth noting that ahead of COVID, we're having a very strong sailing season. And for me, that was highlighted by the Victorian Summer of Sailing. And before we watch a short video, I just wanted to thank the 1,400 volunteers who supported the delivery of 27 world and national championships. So Claire, is it possible to cue the video now, or are we going on to the next slide? That's great, thank you. And look, again, while many events have been cancelled or postponed this summer, it's great to see that many clubs around the country are still open for business and providing regattas. And again, I just wanted to note that the 2021 yachting champs have only been postponed, not cancelled. And we're looking to sending out EOIs for clubs to host probably in the second half of next year. So in terms of club affiliation fees, again, as I touched on, COVID has had a profound impact on both Australian sailing and the clubs. And in order to properly understand the impact, we provided a survey to clubs, and they were distributed in around July. And I was very pleased to see that we had just over 200 responses. And based on the information that you provided us, we did some financial modelling, and we engaged with the board and also our audit and risk committee to ensure that we had the right positioning around club affiliation fees. We then shared and discussed our recommendation to the state and territory presidents, and we then expected to provide a one-off fee relief for FY 2021 shortly, and that will be communicated by the end of this month, as we've communicated some months ago. And again, just reinforcing that time delay was to provide the clubs with the opportunity to preserve their cash flow. And likewise, we're very mindful that while we invoice in 1 October, that monthly payments will commence from January for those clubs who next slide, please. Membership and participation. So membership, again, based on COVID, membership is steady at the moment, but participation, as we would all know, has been impacted by COVID. Just when we looked like we were ready to maintain a winter season, various states closed their borders and imposed restrictions on us. So we are a victim of those restrictions, but again, they're limited to some states. So some states have opened up and are competing very well. Other states are less likely, and we're very mindful that Victoria is in lockdown in the moment. But again, membership and participation is our number one priority, and certainly our number one priority coming out of the pandemic. In terms of the Welcome to Our Playground campaign, that's a campaign that focuses on promoting the benefits of sailing in Australia as a safe, inclusive, recreational activity. And it's a play on the waters around Australia being both our playground and our office. And I think it fits nicely with the sort of brand and the sort of profile that we want to create to a broader audience. So we'll be providing clubs with templates and imagery to get involved with the campaign. But we're also, as I said, very conscious that we'll be tailoring those campaigns and assisting you to tailor those campaigns in each state as we collectively emerge from the restrictions. And again, just wanted to flag that will be a national campaign, and we'll be supporting you in terms of online, social, radio, and some outdoor. In terms of Discover Sailing Day, it will go ahead this year, but it won't be the national campaign, again, considering the restrictions we have around Australia and the different positions each club is depending on their state or territory. And again, we will be providing clubs with the usual promotional artwork and material on that. I don't propose to talk to Rule 46. Glenn Stanaway did a very good job on that in a previous club conference webcast. So all I would just reiterate is that, again, the delay to 1 January 22 was to ensure that there aren't any impost on club operations. We're very keen to ensure that you really do need to get on with the business of supporting your members and getting onto the water. So again, they're driving one of the key reasons that we made that decision to delay the introduction is to ensure that we're supporting clubs. In saying that, we are also very mindful that you should be proceeding with sale pass. But again, that's been delayed in order to benefit the clubs. Next slide, please. And the youth development pathway. So there have been significant changes to the youth pathway, and they include the introduction of new classes to the Olympics, and that's both the kite foiling class, the mixed offshore, and also the windsurfer class. And again, I'll touch on that in terms of the new events for the Olympics. But in terms of the state underpinning review findings, I'd recommend the most recent nautical news, which sort of touches on the youth development theme and talks about the SUP review and the findings, and does that far better than I could do. So I'd recommend that you read that. In terms of the national pathway and national pathway appointments, that's a really exciting opportunity for us, because we're looking at our pathway in a different way. In terms of engaging both in creating a pathway to create lifelong sailors, but also to provide opportunities for those athletes who do want to pursue representative duties, that there is a pathway for them as well. So earlier this year, we engaged Melissa Wilson, who has come on board as our pathway and network lead, and she is building the high performance pathway and making some specific pathway appointments, both in terms of the new classes, which we are keenly focused on ahead of Paris 24, but also the other piece of the work will be around what is the club-based sailing pathway to create both the feeder model, but also lifelong sailors. Part of the work that we're doing in terms of the pathway is to ensure that it ladders up to our broader high performance strategic plan. And again, we've engaged Mike McGovern recently to come in and play the role of our new high performance director, which will allow us to create the framework for a sustainable, repeatable Olympic success going forward. It has that. It also means that Ian Murray, who will be known to you all, is now going to be focused on the preparation for Tokyo. And again, I'll touch on that. I'll touch on that shortly. Next slide, please. So the team, and I might just start by noting that we've got 8 classes of qualified athletes for Tokyo 2020. Even though those games are being postponed, the AOC have confirmed to us that the selected athletes will still form part of the Australian Olympic team. We were very proud to be able to announce Matt Wern and also Matt Belcher and Will Ryan as the first members of the Australian Olympic team for the Tokyo Olympics. So our 8 classes are qualified, all but the women's 470 and the Finn class remain selected as part of the team, and we're just working with the AOC, IOC and World Sailing to ensure what the process will be for the selection of those 2 classes. As I flagged, we did make some changes to the high performance leadership team this year, and we're very pleased that Mike McGovern has joined us in order to build our strategic plan. It's a plan that we would hope will provide us with the strong platform that we need for sustainable success for the organisation going forward. And we're very mindful that the decisions that we make around both the strategic platform and the pathway will create the platform to allow both our athletes to have their best day at the Olympics and World Champs, but also that there is a sustainable feeder model coming through. So we are creating the champions of tomorrow. Probably the last slide, please. So in terms of awards and conferences, I'm really pleased, and Joe touched on this at the outset, I'm really pleased that almost 1,500 people have registered to attend these club conferences over the last 8 weeks. And there's been over 10,000 views of the presentations either live or via the replay, which I think is a really healthy interest and commitment and engagement with our sport. In terms of the awards, we've had over 300 nominations for the Australian Sailing Awards, including 30 nominations for the Club of the Year, which I do think is a record. State finalists and winners will be announced online through September, with the state winners then going on to be finalists for the national awards, and they will be announced throughout October. In closing, and perhaps on a sad note, I'd like to acknowledge the passing of Peter Campbell on Tuesday. He was a giant of our sport and contributed so much to sailing, and I did want to send our condolences to his family and loved ones. Finally, I'd just like to thank you all. Joe started the presentation by thanking you, but I'd really like to thank you all of you, both for joining us this evening, but also for the work that you do at your clubs every day. It's incredibly important that we have your support, because we exist to support you. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank all the presenters. Bridie O'Donnell, who you can hear as a presenter in the Tour de France at the moment. Glenn Stanaway, who did such a good job. He was invited back for a second presentation. Suzette Evans, Joel Steenham, Brett Yardley, Adam Griswood and Olivia Newman, all of the RMs who did an outstanding job with their presentations last year, and of course Claire Ridgway for coordinating all of these conferences, dealing with the invariable sort of IT bugs and doing it with aplomb. So thank you very much. As we said at the outset, there will be time for questions, so if there are any questions, we're very happy to deal with them now, or take them on notice. So there's one from Chris from Hunters Hill. Can we please publish the State Underpinning Pathway Review report? The update report is a bit light on. Let me take that on notice, Chris. If it's in a position where we can publish it, then by all means. If it was an internal document in order to create the underpinning review and recommendations, then we'll certainly have a discussion with you around the underpinning or underlying decisions and that gave rise to that report. There's one here from Mark about rent relief. And again, Mark, we've been, as I flagged, we've been discussing both with state and local governments about rent relief. I think yours relates to rent relief for pen holders in marinas. And look, that may be a conversation that you need to have with your marina operator. But again, if my view would be if they've been eligible to seek rent relief, then we'd be obliging them to pass on that rent relief to pen holders. But again, I might take that on notice and just see where we are in terms of Victoria and elsewhere. That looks like it for the question. So on that basis, I might pass back to you, Jo.
Great, thank you so much, Ben, for giving us an update on all the work that the team at Australian Sailing has been doing. Again, as I said at the outset, our webinar series will be on our club conference page on sailing.org.au. We'd love you to look out for our feedback, to get your feedback. So have a look in your inbox for a survey so that we can make sure that anything that we do actually hopefully is useful and also helpful. For those of you in Victoria, our hearts still remain and thoughts still remain with you at a very, very challenging time, and know that hopefully there are better days ahead from you. Again, thank you for all of you who have joined us throughout this series. We really look forward to seeing you in person and also hopefully back on the water soon. So stay safe and stay well, and have a great night. Thanks all.